Okay, so let's get started. So welcome everyone to our latest webinar from Plan Partners discussing short-term accommodation and the NDIS Section 33 changes. We are recording this session to be able to send it out to those who can't join us today. If you would like to add in closed captions, there is an option through the Teams to do this. So simply click More, then Language and Speech, and select Show Live Captions. And also, please keep yourself on mute and your cameras off for the presentation. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we all meet. I'd like to extend an acknowledgement and welcome to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as we recognise the ongoing contribution to land, sea and community. We also pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. For anyone that hasn't heard of Plan Partners, we are a national plan manager with offices right across Australia. We're passionate about being active in the community, organising events, education sessions and webinars aimed at helping participants and providers better understand the ever-evolving NDIS landscape. My name's Melina Tramer-Shannon and I'm the State Relationship Manager for New South Wales and ACT here at Plan Partners. I'll be your host for today's webinar and I'm really looking forward to guiding you through today's session. I would also like to introduce Justine Hall and Natasha Isherwood, who will be moderating the chat, and also Kristen Daniels, who will be joining me to answer some of the Section 33 changes. Okay, so before I do get started with the STA presentation, I would like to acknowledge that there was a webinar held earlier in the week by DSC stating that it is not a plan manager's responsibility to ask for any supporting evidence for STA. I want to also acknowledge that there is still a lot of discussion and confusion around this topic. This is our position on how we're approaching this as a business, and we have built our processes off the back of what we've been requested from the pre-payment integrity team over the last year. While we still can't guarantee the NDIA will approve claims, the reason we do ask for any supporting evidence is to maximise the chances of the short-term accommodation claim being processed successfully. Okay, so let's now get into it. So short-term accommodation. Firstly, what is STA? So STA provides respite for families and informal carers, allowing them time to rest and recharge while ensuring the participant continues to still receive the much needed support that they need. STA plays a really critical role in really trying to prevent the carer burnout by offering those really much needed short-term breaks. As we all know, caring for someone can be incredibly rewarding, but also emotionally and physically demanding. So STA also provides the participant with the opportunity to have a break from their usual living environment. So another question we always get asked is, who can actually access STA? So a participant can access STA if they have informal supports, say like a family or a friend that provides their day-to-day care, if they need a break from their usual living arrangements, if they would benefit from the short-term accommodation in order to work towards an NDIS goal. So an example of this would be if they're wanting to maybe increase their independence, that would be part of their NDIS goal. or they have STA written within their NDIS plan. So another question we get asked is, who might not be eligible for STA? So unfortunately, you wouldn't be eligible for STA if you are currently living in a supported independent living facility, like a SIL, as you're already getting that 24/7 support that's already been provided for you. You also wouldn't be able to access STA if you live alone with paid supports, or if you're requesting STA for holiday or recreational purposes. So another great question is, where and when can a participant access their STA? So where can they actually go? So a participant can use their STA if they are wanting to use it with a specialist STA provider. They can use it in a respite facility, in supported apartments, or private rentals or serviced apartments. So on the flip side, so where can't you use your STA? So unfortunately, you aren't able to use your STA for any holidays or leisure travel. You can't go interstate or overseas. And STA is just for the participant. It doesn't cover accommodation for family or friends. So how often can a participant use STA to have a break? STA is usually funded for up to 14 days at a time with a maximum of 28 days per year. You can break this up into, say, 4 one-week blocks throughout the year. You can do 2 two-week blocks, or even a weekend here or there. If a participant was to receive one-to-one supports, this would need to be stated within their NDIS plan. So what's included when a participant decides to use STA? So in a group-based setting, STA covers more than just a place to stay. The NDIS typically funds a daily rate that includes their accommodation, personal care, meals, so your breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks, and your activities, whether that be social or skill building activities. These are bundled into a single rate, generally based on the NDIS pricing arrangements and pricing limits. So if you were to use STA outside of that group-based setting, such as if you're wanting to maybe access a private home or service apartment, the only thing that would be covered is your accommodation and direct supports. Unfortunately, your meals and activities are no longer automatically included. Also, something just to keep in mind, if you aren't using a registered STA provider, additional documentation may be required to justify the reasonable and necessary. And that moves on to the next slide. What does reasonable and necessary mean for STA? So to be funded by the NDIS, the short-term accommodation must meet reasonable and necessary criteria outlined in the NDIS Act. This means STA must directly relate to the participant's disability needs, support their NDIS goals, and represent value for money. STA may be considered reasonable and necessary if it is providing that respite for the informal carers to prevent that burnout. It supports the participant in building independence. It's cost effective, safe, and meets the participant's support needs. STA may not be considered reasonable or necessary if it's used for, say, a crisis accommodation situation without having that NDIS planner approval. So before considering STA, again, we've got some really quick 4 questions to be able to ask. And that would be, is STA stated in the current NDIS plan? What is the purpose of the STA and how does it support the plan goals? Is the participant using it for respite to have that bit of a break, or are they using it as a skill building? Does the STA represent value for money? And does it meet the NDIA guidelines? So the requirements that are needed to submit an invoice. So recently, the NDIA have become more thorough in reviewing invoices. As a result, some claims that were previously approved are now being rejected to not meeting the NDIS guidelines for reasonable and necessary support. While we can't guarantee that the NDIA will approve your claim, we want to make sure that we have all the necessary supporting evidence before we submit your claim. So again, another good question we get asked is, what does a compliant invoice look like? So you can see here that on the example, this invoice has the participant's full name, their NDIS number, service details, including the dates and times, and the NDIS line items. Here at Plan Partners as well, if you are ever unsure, you can always submit a quote up front for our team to review prior to your STA stay. And if you have a look in the chat function, you will now find a really handy STA checklist for you to be able to save and use as a guide. And as well, I'm really conscious of time. I'm going to open up for a couple of questions on STA before we get straight into the Section 33 changes. So I'm going to ask Natasha or Justine, do we have a couple of questions in the chat at all?
Hi, Melina. We do have a question from Tara. So
Yes.
What are the current rules around flexibility where, for example, the ratio is funded at 1:3, but the client wants to use 1:1?
Yeah, in regards to the ratios, we would always recommend, if you are needing that 1:1 ratio, that you do get that NDIA approval first in order to receive that 1:1 ratio.
Thank you.
We also have quite a number of questions around accessing STA interstate and overseas. I think at the end of the day, it comes back to whether the NDIS considers the purpose of that travel to be a holiday or not. I think that's really what the defining line is there. So there is absolutely no argument around an NDIS participant accessing support to travel overseas, and the support can be paid for, the support hours can be paid for by the participant's NDIS plan. But when it comes to travelling with a partner or travelling overseas and wanting to access STA, I think at the end of the day, it comes back down to an NDIS determination as to whether that travel overseas or interstate was for a holiday. And so you just need to be very, very clear as to what the intention is behind that travelling interstate or overseas with when you want to access your STA supports.
Thank you so much, Justine, and thank you, Tash. Again, I am really conscious of time and I will open up again for some questions, but I am going to move on now to the NDIS Section 33 funding periods. Okay, so let's talk about the NDIS Section 33 changes and what we know so far. So as of the 19th of May, each brand new and reassessed NDIS plan will now be following the NDIS Section 33 changes. The recent amendments aim to enhance transparency, budgeting, and fund management for participants, providers, and plan managers. The NDIS must now specify 3 matters in every participant's plan. The first matter being total funding amounts. So previously, participants were able to access the full amount within their NDIS plan. With the new changes means the funds within your NDIS plan will no longer be released all at once. Instead, plan funds will be made available in smaller amounts at set times throughout the plan period. So then we move on to the funding component amounts. This was previously known as support budgets and categories. The three main components are core for everyday activities and supports, capacity building for building skills and independence, capital for one-off purchases such as assistive technology or home modifications. Components may have separate funding periods within each category that may be released at different times. Then we move on to the funding periods. There was a lot of different language being used to describe these changes within these new NDIS plans. So you might see the words as funding periods, supports, categories, funding components, and even funding instalments. So what does the new NDIS plans look like? So when a participant receives their new NDIS plan, you will see that it has now been broken up into sections which are known as funding releases. For example, if you were to be funded $25,000 for core funding over a 12-month plan, that funding could be broken up into 4 release sections like the example above, which means you'll be able to access $6,250 per release for 4 releases within the 12-month period. We also know that funding for each category can be released weekly, monthly, quarterly, and yearly. And we also know that this is actually at the NDIS planner discretion on how they set up these funding periods. And what are we doing here at Plan Partners? So at Plan Partners, as a leading plan manager in the industry, we received the news of these changes at the exact same time as everybody else. Since then, our team have been working around the clock to adapt, understand the updates in details, and ensure we're in the very best position to be able to support all of our participants, providers, partners throughout this transition. So what are we able to do to support our participants? So our system is currently set up and able to support participants with funding periods and continue to still process their invoices. We are currently supporting a large number of participants with funding periods within their NDIS plans. We're also working on key changes to our dashboard that will be coming very soon to show the funding periods within your NDIS plan in a really clean and simplified way. And we will also continue to still communicate any future updates and changes that we may receive. I would now like to introduce Kristen Daniels, our product manager here at Plan Partners, to be able to help me go through some of our frequently asked questions. So I'd like to welcome Kristen.
Hi, Melina. Thank you.
Well, thanks for joining me. Kristen, so I think before all the changes started, we were all told that the plans will be for 12 months. So do you know if all the new NDIS plans are going to be for the duration of the 12 months?
Yeah, absolutely. And this was also communicated by the NDIA in some of their webinars that the intention was for plans to be 12-month periods during this transition. However, we have already seen quite a few customers that have a range of plan duration, anywhere from 1 to 5 years. So we believe that this is also at planner discretion in how they're set up. and based on the participant's needs.
Wow. And Kristen, I know we've now got the funding periods and the breaking down of the funding. So if a participant was to receive these funding breakdowns, can they actually use funding from a future funding release in order to pay for an invoice?
Unfortunately, to our knowledge at the moment, we actually wouldn't be able to pay from a future funding period for invoices if the funding needed to be pulled forward. It's only what we've actually got access to in what's available within that first funding period, as an example, and the person would actually need to wait until the next release date for that funding period to have another funding drop.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you for clearing that up. I think there was a bit of confusion on that, and there still may be a bit of confusion on that one.
Definitely.
And what happens if a participant receives their brand new NDIS plan or it gets reassessed and they're not happy with the allocation of the funds that's being needed, or they actually need extra support? So what are some of the things that they can actually do?
Yeah, absolutely. So our understanding is that the participant can work with their NDIS contact or planner from the very beginning to make sure that the structure aligns and suits their needs. However, if at any point that structure was no longer working for the participant or the funding periods weren't aligned, they could actually then move towards having a plan variation or plan reassessment to make sure that the structure suits their change in circumstance.
Okay, fantastic. So if they've received a plan and they weren't happy, or they feel like they need some extra supports and things like that, so they are able to go back to the NDIA and the planner and ask for that reassessment. Is that right? Just so I know.
Absolutely. And usually the NDIS contact details should be at the end of the person's plan with who to contact.
Oh, fantastic. And what happens, Kristen, if I do have the first release of the funding period and there is some unspent funds there? What happens with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So any unspent funds within a funding period will roll over to the next funding period and still be available for use. And also, if we received an invoice from the previous funding period, as long as there were still funds available when that funding period was finished, we would still be able to claim from that original funding period if there were funds available.
Fantastic. And I think you've just answered my next question. And the next question is, what happens if an invoice falls between the two funding periods? So let's just say I get for a month and then it's kicked over to the next month and it's fallen over those two periods. What usually happens then?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really common question that we're getting at the moment, because also I know providers have limited visibility of funding periods. So a provider wouldn't be to know on exactly what dates they might be aligned with. So what we can actually do as plan managers, we can manage all of that for the provider. So if an invoice covered multiple dates across multiple funding periods, we can actually still submit that all in one claim to the NDIA. That's not an issue. The really important part to note for everybody, though, is it makes the actual breakdown of service dates more important. So when we receive an invoice, we really just need providers to make sure that they're calling out exactly what dates for what service on each of the line items, rather than just, I know we have experienced a lot of providers would send us just a date range previously. So it might be a month of services all at once, and they would just call that out at the top of the invoice saying that this is for the full month. If that were to happen and we received an invoice in that situation, we would need to reject the invoice and get clear dates sent back through, which would potentially delay the processing of the invoice. So we highly encourage everyone to please break down service dates really clearly on the invoice, and then we can sort out the rest of the admin.
Oh, amazing. That's so helpful. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you.
And then as well, I think this is a great question, especially as plan managers. So we obviously know that some things pop up, or a crisis situation, or something happens, or whatever it is, that's life. These things happen. So if something was to happen to a participant and they needed that extra support, or an emergency came up and they did have that reasonable, necessary explanation and a proper reason, are we able to release additional funding based on the emergency situation of the circumstance at all?
Unfortunately, plan managers actually don't have access to releasing any additional funding or pulling from other funding periods. Even if there was really great supporting evidence as to why that would be important and needed, we would still need the participant or our plan nominee or support coordinator to contact the NDIA and work with the planner or my NDIS contact to see if an emergency plan variation could be put in place to pull some of that funding forward or to have additional funding released.
Right, thank you. I think that's always really good to know and just have that in the back of your mind that if an emergency does come, exactly what to be able to do and be able to plan for that one. So that's very helpful. And the last question that we do have is who can actually see the funding periods on the NDIS portals?
Yeah, perfect. So general providers aren't able to see funding periods and how the funds are structured. The people that will be able to have access to that is plan managers, support coordinators, plan nominees, and of course, participants are able to see all the funding periods and the breakdowns of how it's been allocated.
Oh, awesome. And I think we're having a discussion about this before. So I think it's even more crucial now that participants and the support coordinators do work a lot closer with their service providers to be able to kind of really let them know what the funding periods are so then they can kind of work within those new parameters. So I think there's going to be some more relationship building there.
Definitely.
And I would now like to open up for a couple of questions. So Natasha and Justine, do we have any questions at all in the chat?
We have plenty.
Yeah,
we can't keep up. Apologies, everybody. I will just, preface to say, look, this is very new to us as well. We're in the depths of trying to understand the new Section 3 changes. And as Melina's discussed, we're also in the depths of trying to upgrade our system in the background. I know we're getting a lot of questions in regards to will we be able to be transparent on funding periods to service providers? Also, a lot of questions coming through around our current service agreement process. Obviously, that will go hand in hand with our system changes. And once we are confident with how that's going to work, we'll be releasing that in the next 2 weeks along with our system changes. So in regards to the funding periods, I think one of the main things that's coming up is if we do receive invoices for one funding period and the funding's already exhausted, can we roll that invoice into the next funding period? Unfortunately, we can't. The whole reason the NDIS has actually done this is to start to control the spend a little bit more and to reduce that overspending within plans, which hopefully in the future will obviously, I guess, move to a more sustainable NDIS. But I might just throw to you, Just, to see whether or not you've got any questions in the chat that we can answer.
There's a lot of providers here today, and hello everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And obviously, any questions that we don't answer today, we will do our very best to get back to you post webinar, because a lot of them have the same themes. And one of the themes that I'm picking out is the consent to share information. So will providers be told about these funding periods? How much information will providers receive? And I think from my understanding and the way that we operate, we'll only share specific information around funding periods and amounts with the specific consent of the participant or nominee. So really, we can absolutely assist in that conversation if we do have consent to share, but that is a conversation between the service provider and the participant or nominee to be able to make, as always, if you're providing supports to an NDIS participant, it's good business practice to make sure that the funding's available to be able to provide those supports. So yes, we will definitely be able to assist, but only with a consent to share lodged with our business. That's me. There's plenty more there as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of the questions we're being asked we're actually still working through as well. So obviously we're just working on limited information that was received 2 weeks ago. So I understand that you guys have got a lot of questions. So I think potentially what we'll do is we might take a lot of these questions away, I think, and maybe put together some additional information that will address a lot of these questions that are in the chat at the moment. But in the meanwhile, if you do have any other further questions, you can reach out to us. There are our direct contacts on screen. You can also email our generic email, which is partnerships@planpartners.com.au. But please continue just to pop some questions in the chat. And I think the best thing we can do today is actually take those questions away and try and provide further information in the coming days when we share that presentation.
Yeah, and we're also very open to coming out and visiting your teams if you are in one of the states that we service, and we service all states. So please reach out to your state business relationship manager, state relationship managers, book in a meeting, because this is what our job is. We want to be able to support you guys and your clients and customers through this transitional time. And yeah, we're more than happy to come out and bring the donuts.
And coffees.
Hello. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So my name's Yelena from Absolute R&R Respite. I just want to know, is this video meeting on your website? Can we access this as a copy of it?
Yep, we are recording it today, and we will be sending out with the presentation.
Okay, all right, thank you. Sorry, I just had some echoing in the beginning that was driving me crazy and I couldn't hear it all.
That's okay.
That's okay.
Awesome. Yeah, I will also acknowledge that we did have some issues with the STA checklist today as well, and popping that into the chat. So we will also be sending that out with the presentation from today as well.
It's amazing. I'll leave the meet the team slide on there just in case, just to give you some time if you did want to jot down the state relationship managers or your local business relationship managers details on there. Again, as Natasha said, please feel free to reach out if you want to just organise a coffee catch-up or a Teams meeting, whatever it is, if you wanted to go through some further questions and really see how we can help support yourself and your participants. Our team are really, really more than happy to be able to help and assist. So please don't feel shy and feel free to reach out.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for attending.